Well, welcome to the next experimental live stream. um, Again, no pre-planning. I don't really know what I'm talking about here, what I'm going to talk about. I may also not know what I'm talking about. But I wrote in the description for this one just a whole bunch of, I don't know, words that convey the theme of things that I often talk about on podcasts, in the prepared podcasts or in interviews that I've given and so on. Physics, philosophy, optimism, origins, science, sophistry, astronomy, AI, epistemology, ethics, mathematics, morality, creativity and capitalism, wealth, wisdom, prophecies, predictions, life, the universe, and everything. Or, as I like to say, the three R's, or what I think the three R's really should be: rationality, reason, and reality. So I suppose I could pick up on any one of those themes and tease them apart. What about this idea of prophecy and prediction? It's a thing I talk about very often. It's in part the distinction between pessimism and optimism as well, or it leads people to tend in one direction or another when they think that their ideas can do things they can't. In particular, the thing that those ideas they have cannot do is provide an accurate picture of the future. It's not able to forecast the future. And so this distinguishes between a prediction and a prophecy. Both are claims about the future, about what is going to happen. The distinction is that in the physical sciences, sometimes, if we're lucky, we can derive from our good explanations of the world, our good theories, predictions. And this is very true of physics in particular, but not always. It seems to be a common notion that the purpose of science is to predict, that is one of the fundamental reasons that science exists at all in the first place, and perhaps the only reason. And we disagree with this. There's a number of reasons we disagree with this, and I'll come to those. But just the way in which prediction works, we can use Newtonian mechanics, let's say, to predict, get an estimate for how long it will take if something is dropped out of a window from a 10-story building. We assume that, the acceleration due to gravity is 9.8 meters per second. We know what the height of that window happens to be, and we can determine the time taken for the thing to fall to the ground. That's a prediction. It is a logical derivation using the equations of motion that allow us to figure out how long something takes, assuming nothing intervenes. That's a reasonable assumption sometimes. But sometimes it's not. And even within physics, we have variables like our air resistance, friction, that can get in the way of making even accurate predictions for such a simple system as that. The trope example that I've used before as well is in chemistry. I know that when I mix an acid and a base, I will get a salt and water being produced. That's a prediction. Give me any acid, hydrochloric acid. Give me any base, sodium hydroxide. Mix them together. I'm going to get water and sodium chloride, salt water, in other words. That's a prediction. A logical derivation from the deep theory about how chemistry works. Can everyone hear me? Am I coming through? There's nothing happening in the chat, so I'm just concerned that audio might not be working, but we'll persevere. And so in the physical sciences, we are good. Excellent. We've got audio there. So in the physical sciences, we can do this. We can apply, in particular, in the physical sciences where we have laws of physics which allow us to reduce reality in some narrow respects to mathematical formulae describing particular things that happen, like the falling of objects or the sliding of things down planes, the movement of celestial bodies around the sun, around other stars. We can predict these things. But now, in the realm of human affairs, we have systems that not only are far more complex and we can't account for all the variables, but the crucial difference here in the arena where people are causal agents in what's going on. They're creating knowledge. And if they create knowledge, if they genuinely create knowledge, the content of that knowledge cannot be predicted ahead of time. And why? Because it's a genuine act of creation. If you could predict it ahead of time, then you would have it at that moment. And therefore, it wouldn't be a creation in the future. It will be a thing that you've got now. We can't do that. And even in principle, I would say, we can't do it as well. But put that aside. What then happens is scientists in particular, but lots of intellectuals, conflate both claims about reality as being rather the same thing. And they will use this word prediction to talk about what the world is going to be like in 2030 or 2050 or 2100. Never mind what the climate itself will be like, but what technology is going to exist then. What society could be like. Now, we all enjoy, guessing and imagining the world of the future. But the fact is we cannot know the world of the future because we cannot know the explanations that, in particular, scientists will devise about phenomena yet to be discovered and which will change not only technology, but will radically transform the way in which we envisage ourselves and the rest of the world that we find ourselves in. So therefore, anyone today who is making a claim about the distant future, forecasting what things are going to be like in the realm of human affairs, is prophesying. Very little difference between the prophet of today, who may have PhDs behind their name, and the prophets of the past, literally looking into crystal balls. One has Bayesian inference generation. The other one has a direct line to the divine. Both of them are claiming to know things they cannot know. And the thing about prophecy is it's biased towards pessimism because people can imagine all the ways in which things can go wrong. But they very rarely imagine all the solutions that people will creatively come up with. Any questions at all from anyone? Thoughts? Arjun is here to ask thoughts on laws. Don't they inhibit some form of creativity, but without them, won't things be a disaster? Now, do you mean laws as in the legal system? Laws created by nation states and democracies in order to prohibit certain behaviors? Presumably you don't mean laws of physics, the laws of nature. Laws of physics and laws of nature place prohibitions on what can be done physically in the universe. But then those prohibitions don't actually ever cause any problems for us. We can achieve precisely what we want to achieve, and in fact, allow us to solve the problems that are soluble, which is all of them. Arjun, you've said yes, exactly, but yes, exactly to what? I presume you're meaning, okay, legal. Okay, so the legal stuff. Yeah, it depends upon the law. Don't they inhibit some form of creativity? If the law, yes, the short answer is yes, they do. But if the law is, of course, you shall not, I'm talking like it's a commandment. But, prohibitions against assaulting people, prohibitions against theft, prohibitions against murder, all of these are laws, and quite rightly, not only do they not inhibit creativity, they are the very means by which creativity is allowed to flourish in civilization. Civilization requires that we have prohibitions on certain things so that creativity is not destroyed. And the major form of creativity in our world right now is, of course, the capacity of human beings to generate explanations. That's the most powerful form of creativity in the universe. Prior to that, the only form of creativity that existed was the one that arose due to evolution by natural selection, which created different species. Now, today we have this capacity to create explanations inherent within us. It is our nature, if anything is. And laws at their best are able to facilitate the cooperation between people to help maximize creativity. So there's that side of the ledger. But what makes laws? Governments make laws. Justice system makes laws, the laws of precedence. And the justice system and parliaments, congresses, senates, they're made of people. And people are, of course, fallible. And so sometimes they'll make bad laws. And they might not consciously be working towards evil. In fact, I think they think that they're always doing the best. But, there's no perfect system for generating laws. So there will be errors in the generation of laws sometimes. And therefore, regulations will be put in place that do curb creativity. And it is a problem that we have now. And if you gather large groups of people with authority and power, even if democratically elected, into a place, the expectation is they'll do something, which is a worry. Sometimes, don't you just want them to sit there and do nothing? This is why one of the beauties of, one of the great virtues of certain systems in the West, the Westminster system, the American system as well. What people regard as being a great vice of the system, a problem with the system, which is sometimes things grind to a halt and nothing appears to be getting done. Others in our tradition think that is a great virtue. That when the Senate, for example, in the United States prohibits the Congress from enacting some legislation and there is so-called gridlock, we think that's good. We think that means that the parliaments, the elected officials are being prevented from doing a bad thing quite often. The system itself is working in the way that it should, slowing things down, allowing people the time to reconsider. Now, maybe sometimes you want the legislation to go through more quickly. And there's problems with that as well. So there's the flip side to that. Look at the story that went out on Twitter just yesterday. That was a fascinating one. Let me bring it up because I read through this entire article and my goodness, I'll just read the part of the article that I tweeted out. I said in my tweet, this was a post by a person who goes by the Twitter name @the Okay, so @THEZZVI. And he wrote an article on Substack about vaccine updates in the United States. So the production of new vaccines, every time there's a new strain, we want that means the virus has altered in some way, and therefore our vaccines need to be altered in some way. In the United States, the people controlling the rate at which vaccines are being produced are in part the government agency known as the Food and Drug Authority, the FDA, and they're slowing things down rather than just allowing the free market to do its thing, to produce vaccines as rapidly as the virus itself is mutating. Now, you might think, well, they have the best interests of people at heart, but I think they have entirely the wrong philosophy about these things. The part of the article that I tweeted, let me just read it. Well, in fact, my tweet goes like this. I've said the entire post, linked below, is astonishing and well worth reading, I should add. Regulators slowing down vaccine production. And why? Well, there are no good reasons. A highlight among them for me is that one of the expert immunologists advising the FDA on producing new vaccines for new COVID strains has said, and by the way, I looked up this guy and found out his background. And, he is an immunologist. He's an expert. He's a world-renowned expert in these things. He's advising the FDA on what they should do with allowing the drug companies, Pfizer or whoever else, Moderna, etc., allowing them to put vaccines out there to market so that people can get their vaccines and be protected against new strains of the virus. In some cases, what is said to be worse strains of the virus for people. Anyway, so this person has said, this person advising the FDA has said, quote, "I'm uncomfortable with the US having a vaccine that's not accessible to the rest of the world," Perlman said, noting there's already a perception that the US and other wealthy countries have put themselves first. He goes on to say, Quote, and if we're saying that a bivalent vaccine is so much better, but it's not accessible to much of the world, I think that's ultimately a bad thing for getting vaccines out to the whole world. So he's concerned that we shouldn't allow the United States to mass produce vaccines and allow their own people to have them first, unless the entire world can have it simultaneously. But that's just not a possible technological situation to be in, ever. So before we get into that, let's just say the FDA has the power, so therefore there is this law that gives them the authority, the power to prevent a vaccine from reaching the market, from reaching the people it needs to reach. And why? Why do they do what they do? Because experts advising them, experts like that, who have this philosophy that unless everyone in the world can have the vaccine, then no one should have the vaccine because it's inequitable. But new technologies, by definition, when they're invented, must be rare because they're new. And so only some people will have them. At the moment, space travel is only for the most wealthy. But we need to go through that phase. And these people out there that say things like, oh, what a waste of money. You know, there are people starving on Earth. And meanwhile, we have multi-millionaires and billionaires taking rides into space for entertainment. If they don't do that, if people aren't able to push the frontiers forward by investing vast amounts of wealth into doing seemingly frivolous things, but which are testing systems and taking risks, one must say, then it will be available to no one because we won't have gone through the phase where people are spending a lot of money to push the frontier forward. And the same is true of vaccines. We need some people to have it first. It's going to be expensive. The wealthy countries need to be able to invest in these things. And the wealthy people pay taxes to their government and possibly even pay for the vaccine itself so that the cost of the vaccine comes down and then everyone can have it. This is what has happened over time, all the time. And so, yeah, this is the flip side of regulation, as you say, Arjun. This is the bad kind of law. When regulations are put in place that interfere in the market, then we have severe problems that can actually cause, in this case, deaths of people. It will slow down vaccine production. It has already. And there will be some people who otherwise would have gotten the vaccine who don't get the vaccine in time and will die. So that's how serious this is. All because the road to hell is paved with good intentions, as people say. No doubt that man's a nice man, that immunologist. He wants to do the right thing. He wants the poor people to have the vaccines in the so-called third world now that America has. Of course, we all do. But that would be magic to assume that everyone can have it at the same time. It's not possible. Vaccines cost money to produce. The only way that vaccines continue to be produced is if the pharmaceutical companies make vast profits. Good for them. They're doing a great job. Is it error prone? Of course it is. Okay, so that's Arjun's question. What has COVID shown on the optimistic side of humans? Nikhail has asked. Well, look how quickly the vaccine was produced in the United Kingdom. That first vaccine came out very quick because, you may get a little political here. Other countries in the European Union were bound by regulations that Britain had escaped. And so Britain was able to not worry about the regulators in the European Union or anywhere else for that matter. They were able to get in there, the Oxford University scientists, and produce a vaccine more rapidly than it happened before. So that's optimistic. That's great. A similar thing happened in the United States for the first round of vaccines. So what was it called? There was a name of the project. I forget now. Okay, under Donald Trump anyway. And they got the vaccine to happen very quickly. When they needed to, they relaxed regulations. But now they're back to the old system of regulating things. So I think that showed a willingness of people to accept that there was a serious problem and to do something about the serious problem when they were presented with the clear and present danger of the problem, which initially wasn't too politicized. Now, I'm not going to go down the COVID road of all the ways in which it became politicized and the irrationalities that people took on. But the coming up with the vaccine is certainly a source of great optimism, I think, that we can have for people and for science and scientists. Upvote comment. I see Western problem, mostly cultural problem. All that internal conflict mainly comes from too much freedom and editability of social norm. The social norms, I don't think, are that editable. We go through these spasms of irrationality now and again. And yeah, there's some of that happening right now. But that's a consequence of being a dynamic society. Far better to have a dynamic society that is changing due to freedom, due to liberty, than the alternative, which is stasis and being entrenched in certain ideas, not being creative. There can be no royal road to perfect progress and a utopia. We don't want a utopia. We don't want the ideal society. What we want is continual improvement. And a dynamic society offers that. It admits that problems are inevitable. So there can be no utopia because we exist in a universe where problems are going to be encountered of necessity. Because the universe may very well be infinite, and if it's not, it's effectively infinite. And from any direction, comets or asteroids could come, or new viruses could come, or who knows what could come from any direction. Problems can come from anywhere. They're unpredictable by their very nature. Otherwise, they wouldn't be problems if we could predict them ahead of time. And so, because of this, a dynamic society is best able to deal with those. But it's not unproblematic. It's not without problems. It just admits that there will always be problems. So, I see Western problem, mostly cultural problem, all internal conflict mainly comes from too much freedom. I don't think too much freedom. I don't think there's any such thing. Freedom properly understood, I should say. This is where I disagree with the anarchists. I don't think anarchy is necessarily a state of perfect freedom. If people were always reasonable, if human beings were always reasonable and able to not fall into irrationality and not make mistakes, then yeah, anarchy would be a way to organize society, whatever that word would then label, in a situation where everyone just does whatever they want all the time, because no one would ever get into a conflict, because they would just be using reason and reasoning through problems without violence. But the issue is that people do make mistakes. Reason itself is open to being understood ever better in ever more fine-grained detail. And so two people who otherwise regard themselves as perfectly reasonable can still be at loggerheads. And this is why the traditions of the West and the Enlightenment that exist for the resolution of conflict are superior to any alternative hitherto thought of, dreamed of. Whether tyranny, where the strong man at the top, the philosopher king, tells one what to do using authority, or a state of complete anarchy, where there is no such institution or tradition requiring people to behave in a certain way. So I think that we have the balance as right as we know how to have it right now, which is why I am not a supporter of revolution and radical changes to democratic systems, because the democratic systems contain within them inexplicit knowledge about how a society should run, and can correct its errors most rapidly over time. Could there be improvements? Of course. What are they? That's difficult to say. That's far more difficult to say. Nikhil. This is same like monarchy has high growth of development rate because of their fast decision making, but democracy does not. For example, the fastest growth has absolutely occurred in places like the United States. The United States is the wealthiest nation by a long shot around the world. And it is it has fast development. I mean, there's no analog to Silicon Valley anywhere. Yeah. So, but, Australia, the United Kingdom, we are constitutional monarchies. And I happen to think that that is even better than the system in the United States, because there is a constant, namely the royal family, and there is a variable, namely the parliament. And it doesn't really matter who holds the chair of head of state. It could be anyone, but we have this unelected person. Good. It doesn't matter if non-rulers are unelected. Rulers need to be elected because they make the rules, and you need to have a system where you can remove bad rules and bad rulers without violence. And that's what voting is about, and that's what democracy is about. But the Queen of England is not a ruler. She does not make rules. The royal family do not make rules. They're arbiters of a kind. That should the deadlock happen, should the emergency happen, should the constitutional crisis happen, then there is someone who is able to make the decision to get the ball running again, get the ball rolling again, one should say. So if the terrible tragedy happens in one way, shape, or form, that the parliamentary system in the United Kingdom or in Australia grinds completely to a halt, there is this person who can call for new elections. It's basically the system in place. It's happened once in Australia's history. It wasn't the Queen that did it. It's the Queen's designated person, who is the Governor General in the case of Australia, who was able to dissolve Parliament. It was very controversial, but nonetheless, the Parliament got dissolved. There were new elections, and things went on. Okay, rather than the complete crisis that could have happened persisting. So yeah, constitutional monarchies, I think, happen to be an excellent system for governance. In Australia, there's a big movement called the Republican movement. They want to have an Australian head of state, they say. And we have the Governor General. So, but we want to elect this person called the Australian President, who would be the head of state, who would replace the Queen. And I think that's a terrible idea. The reason I think it's a terrible idea is because if you have an election, then that means you have candidates. The candidates will have policy promises. So you'll have competing presidents saying, this is what I'll do as president, and the other person saying, this is what I'll do as president. And therefore, they have to follow through on their promises somehow. There's another seat of power. But we have a system in Australia where there's a Senate and there's a House of Representatives. And that's where the real power resides. In fact, it resides in the executive government. But if you have this president who's been elected, then they'll have power as well. They'll certainly have influence because, they may very well win a majority. And what if win a massive majority, rather? And what if they win a massive majority and they come from one particular political party, which is different to the government? Who wins that tussle, given the president is able to remove governments? So it's a very complicated whole thing. But this is why, again, I go back to constitutional monarchy. It seems to have solved the problem. And the problem is, how do you organize society so that rulers can be most easily removed? That's what democracy is all about. Remove them most easily without violence and allow the progress to keep happening. That's why Great Britain works as well as it does for as long as it does, for centuries. Okay, let's keep going. Any more questions? From Bjorn Alvinge. David has said that in part why the utilitarian theory of morality is wrong. Preferences can be morally wrong. From the perspective of critical rationalism, do you think there are such preferences? Morally wrong preferences? Oh, absolutely. You can have morally wrong preferences. Just because you prefer something doesn't mean that you're preferring the right thing. And then you might have have a preference for stealing things from people, but that doesn't make it right. So, yes. So the utilitarian theory, this idea that we should do what maximizes well-being or maximizes happiness, the great problem I see with that is it goes back to the way in which I started just the live stream, prophecy. We can't know, you can't calculate how much happiness is going to be generated by whatever it is that you do. And I don't think you even have a good theory necessarily. Instead, what morality is about is solving problems at a particular time. Now, if there is a way in which to reduce suffering, absolutely. That seems to be, you have a good explanation of being better than any rival explanation for how to reduce suffering. But remember also, in our understanding of what we're calling critical rationalism there, we don't think there is any sort of perfect theory anyway. That theories are always revisable. We can always come up with improvements to whatever we think our present best theory happens to be. And so that's why we say that morality is about solving moral problems, as science is about solving scientific problems, rather than in science saying, well, here we've got general relativity, there once and for all is our theory of gravity, which is just going to stand forever. So too with morality. I think that with less accuracy do we know morality. And some of these things are useful heuristics. You know, the 10 Commandments can be useful heuristics, I suppose. Utilitarianism can be a useful heuristic. But as for a foundation for morality, we don't need any such thing. Adil has asked, hi, Brett, a question. Is evolution by natural selection a special case of Popper's theory of conjectures and refutations? After all, it all comes back to instantiated knowledge, right? Yes. Yeah. Evolution by natural selection is the means by which the genetic code, I suppose, for want of another word, has found for allowing genes to survive or not, to select for genes, to create the knowledge that enables an organism to survive in a particular environment. It's not explanatory knowledge, but it's knowledge. It's rank trial and error. Okay, the mutation happens in the DNA somewhere of the organism, and either, in most cases, the mutation is such that it is detrimental to the life of that organism because it no longer is fit for the environment, or in the very rare case, the mutation is good for that organism, and so it goes on to survive. And that is knowledge creation, because it's useful information. From the perspective of the organism or the species, a problem has been solved, enabling it to survive better in a given environment. Speaking loosely with those things. But yes, so it is a special kind of conjecture and refutation. The mutation is a kind of conjecture, a blind conjecture, utterly blind conjecture, the most of which will be completely detrimental or useless, perhaps, to the organism, and only some of which will go on to make the organism more fit for that environment. And it is the environment that is doing the refutations, selecting against the weaker organisms. So yes, absolutely, it's a kind of knowledge. But of course, Popper was mainly talking about explanatory knowledge, and knowledge more generally that is that people generate. There's a whole bunch of that. Is this a weekly thing now? I don't know. I don't know if I'm going to do this weekly. Maybe not. We'll see. Perhaps. Pacify software. What are good approaches to deal with people that do not want to keep their positions open for criticism, notably when those people are your friends? Treat them as your friends. I mean, you just leave them be. There's no reason to force someone to engage in a discussion on a topic that they don't want to engage in. There's no reason, as a so-called critical rationalist, to go around criticizing everyone. There's no reason to evangelize to everyone you know in your social circle. There's no reason to persuade anyone. That's not necessary either. If someone asks and they're interested and they want to engage in the discussion, then engage in the discussion, I suppose. if they don't want to keep their position open for criticism, I just take them seriously, honestly. Don't criticize them. Don't engage in the discussion. Then you say, "Oh, we've got nothing to talk about." Well, that's a problem. Find something to talk about where you can have a profitable discussion. Now, you may very well be also asking, what about the situations where, often in politics, let's say, the person ostensibly says they want to engage in a political discussion with you, and you are engaging in a political discussion with them, but you're unable to persuade them. They appear to you to not want their position open for criticism. Well, again, all I can say is that you can only meet people where they are, and if they seem to be indicating by their behaviors and words that they don't want to be criticized, then I guess you could observe that out loud. It's very hard to do without insulting someone. You know, it seems like you don't want to change your mind. It seems like you're not opening to change your mind. It seems like you refuse to consider. Okay, all of these things are like loaded. So better to, it's almost like Wittgensteinian, whereof we cannot speak, thereof we must remain silent. If you genuinely believe the person doesn't want to have their position criticized, then all you can do is not criticize it, because it's not going to be productive in forcing the issue. It's a form of coercion. Then if the person doesn't want criticism and you're providing criticism, that's coercion. That's coercive. They've asked you, presumably, or at least indicated, perhaps non-verbally, they don't want this criticism, and yet you're persisting. So then the problem is with you, not with them, is what I would suggest. I'd like to ask, what is Brett Hall's principle for decision-making? Well, it depends upon the situation, but it's just whether or not one has a good explanation, an intuition, no explanation at all. These are the situations that one can be in. You either have a good explanation, you have a hint, an intuition, or you don't know. Okay, these are your three options, is what I would say in general. And so faced with the decision about what to do, well, if I have a good explanation, then I do what the good explanation would tell me. What's a decision? Should I cross the road right now? Okay, there's a bus coming. Good explanation. My theory is that object rushing down the road at 60 kilometers an hour is a bus. I've decided not to cross the road. It's now nighttime. I've got my headphones in. It's dark. I can't see. Now I'm at the same crossroad. I don't know. So I need to go about gathering evidence in order to refute the theory there's a bus coming down the street with lights turned out, presumably, because I can't see it. So then I make the decision to do what it takes in order to collect the data to refute the theory there is in fact a bus. Okay, so this is what I think we do. Now, what's the point of saying any of that? Well, this is different to the way in which this is normally taught or explained, which is the idea that we weigh options. I don't think we ever do. We don't. Well, the fact is we don't. Weighing options would require you to, weighing with what? If we take this literally, and they mean it literally, what's the unit of weight? So probabilistically, you can assign a probability. How? The interesting thing is you investigate that kind of Bayesian reasoning, how people come up with their priors in the first place, and it's educated guess. It's guesswork. So they're guessing, they're conjecturing, and they're putting a number on it. But it's worse than normal scientific conjecture, which requires a coherent explanation to account for the phenomena. In this case, it's just a number. It's a feeling. It's an emotion. And it doesn't matter if you're an expert or not. In fact, experts in these cases often are more prone to a certain kind of error, a systematic way of thinking about their own field that can be mistaken. Look at physics, after all. Prior to Einstein, no one could think of relativity except for Einstein, because they had a systematic way of thinking about physics that it had to be done in a certain way. And that led them to just thinking in the same way all the time. So just because they were experts in physics actually made the majority of them poorly placed to come up with the replacement of Newtonian physics. So yes, decision making always comes down to the presence or absence of good explanations. And if you have a good explanation, that guides what your theory, what your decision is going to be. Absent a good explanation, then you don't know what to do. And you should probably go about finding more information that can inform you. There are situations where you have intuitions, inexplicit knowledge, a feeling that something isn't quite right. You go for a job interview, let's say, and everything goes well and it's a job that you really want. And then you go home and you reflect, you get offered the job, but there's something there. There's something you can't quite articulate. Didn't feel right. The person interviewing you might have been looking at you a little bit weirdly, a little bit strangely. And you can't exactly say why. You just don't feel right about it. Now, that is inexplicit knowledge. That is, you are getting clues about the environment from the other person, which you need to pay attention to. You don't have a good explanation as to why it is you feel bad about this, even though it might be the ideal job, even though everything about the situation might seem to you to be good, you have a sense that something's not quite right. So what do you do then? Well, you don't know. You're in a position of, again, not knowing. But it is a strong clue, because if you were just relying on your explicit knowledge, then you would say, well, I've got a good explanation. I want this job. The person seemed friendly enough. It pays well. The current position I'm in isn't good. My explanation is I should take the position. But you have this niggling feeling. You have an intuition, which is not exactly a refutation of the good explanation, but it's data. It's evidence of some kind. It's an observation you've made. It is something you need to resolve. It's a problem. And so this inexplicit stuff, you have to resolve it somehow. How do you do it? You ring up the company and you talk more to the people there. You maybe talk to some of the subordinates of the person who interviewed you. Maybe they tell you, maybe they convey the message that this isn't a very nice boss. This isn't someone you want to work for. You do a little bit more digging and you find out, that's what I was sensing. I was sensing that this person was a bit of a sleazebag or something or other. So yes, I think they're the three kinds of ways in which you can be with respect to a decision. You have a good explanation, make the decision. You have an intuition about something that you should do, but you can't quite put it into words. That's another situation where more data needs to be gathered in order to finally resolve it, but you have to pay attention to these intuitions. And finally, you have no information at all. You really don't know. What are we going to have for dinner tonight? I don't know, Chinese, Indian, pizza, KFC, I don't know. You're mentally flipping a coin of a kind. You don't have a good explanation about which way to go. Maybe you just don't care enough. This is the kind of decision that nothing turns on, really. So you can be in that situation rather often of just not knowing. In which case, the resolution could be just pick one, just do the thing, just pick it. Outsourcing it to someone else who might be interested in making that decision. You live with someone else who really doesn't like pizza. Well, there you go. They will make the decision for you, and you don't mind. Bjorn, isn't the point of morality to ensure that we can, in principle, as rational beings, solve problems? Love thy neighbor as yourself is practical, but it's not about trying to achieve some effect. I think in morality, these heuristics, that kind of the golden rule, love thy neighbor as thyself, or what's the platinum rule? Love thy neighbor as they want to be loved. Okay, treat others as you would want to be treated. The golden rule. Treat others as they want to be treated. Platinum rule. Better. Okay, treat others as they want to be treated, because they might not want to be treated the way you want to be treated. But I still come back to the point of morality. The point of morality is to solve problems. So yes, and that's what you've said. And love thy neighbor as thyself. Well, modulo what I've just said about the fact that I don't think that necessarily is true in all cases. Some people don't want to be loved in the way maybe you hate yourself. Some people are in this unfortunate position. And if you hate yourself, then you don't want to love your neighbor as yourself, do you? You've got psychological trauma and issues which make you hate yourself. So you don't want to actually love your neighbor as yourself. You want to love your neighbor as they want to be loved. Okay, so why would we have these sort of golden rules anyway? And these sort of rules of thumb when it comes to morality? To provide a situation in which we can cooperate and get along as a society and a civilization. And I would say ultimately to make progress and solve our problems. So that's why these things exist out there. The first attempts at morality, the religious attempts at morality, were getting to something true. I don't know. It was a slow, incremental evolution of knowledge when it came to morality. These encounters with other civilizations, as well as a turmoil that might have been going on within their own civilization, allowed them to figure out these early tribal communities, early religious ideas, to figure out how best for people to flourish. And so now we can look back at that ancient wisdom and figure out whether or not some of that is worthwhile. Let's see. I've got. For the first time I've been able to hide someone. That's great. Okay. More questions. Do you think Bayesian reasoning is impractical? I mean, it's hard to rank all the possible answers. Not only is it hard to rank all the possible answers, there rarely is many possible answers. This is the great misconception, I think, with Bayesian epistemology. Of all the misconceptions that are out there, and there are many, I've described Bayesian reasoning as being inductivism in a cheap tuxedo. It's inductivism and then add some mathematical formulae on top of it to give it a veneer of rigor. The issue is we are rarely in a circumstance where we ever need to weight our theories or explanations. We're not in that situation. It's hard enough to think of one theory. Look, let's think of something. Dark energy. This energy that is causing the accelerated expansion of the universe. We have no clue what it is. So how can we begin weighting theories about it? We don't even have one. Forget numerous ones where we can update our priors on each of these different theories that we have, these different hypotheses we have, and figure out ways of weighting them. We don't even have one. But if we had one, we could regard it either as a good explanation that we can test or not. Presumably, whatever it is going to have to fit in with quantum theory, general relativity. It's going to have to make predictions of its own. And when it does that, it will qualify if it accounts for the phenomena and is consistent with what we also know is going to be a good explanation with no rivals. Name your scientific theory. There are typically no rivals. It is the scientific theory. There's one. Best case scenario in the history of science is we've had two rival explanations, and the purpose of the crucial test, the experiment, is to decide between the theories guessed. My trope example I always talk about is general relativity and Newtonian gravity. These two competed for some number of years between the publication of general relativity, whenever that was, 1915, something like that, I think, through to Eddington's experiment in 1919. We were in a situation, broadly speaking, where it wasn't known which was the correct theory, Newtonian gravity or general relativity. But the point of that is that this is a very, very rare occurrence in the history of science, in the history of rationality and reason, broadly speaking, where we have two good explanations, genuine rivals. Now, on the Bayesian account, all observational data for centuries testified to the so-called truth of Newtonian gravity. And then in 1919, Arthur Eddington and others did the experiment which refuted Newtonian gravity. So the probability of Newtonian gravity on Bayesian, given Bayesian reasoning, was at its highest the day before it was refuted when it fell to zero. This makes no logical sense. I don't understand how that is supposed to be a useful way of understanding what's going on in science. The truth is what is going on in science is either you have a good explanation or you don't. If you do have a good explanation, then you say this solves the problem of what is going on, accounting for physical reality. In some cases, like dark energy, dark matter, a more complete understanding of evolution by natural selection, how viruses work, name your scientific mystery. In these situations, we don't even have one theory. We have zero theories. It's common to have zero theories. If we're lucky, we've got one that we can rely upon that is a good explanation. And rather often, extremely rarely, we have two. So forget about Bayesian reasoning, whether you presume, oh, let's just weight all our 8 or 9 different theories. I don't know of a situation where that actually is truly the case. And by the way, what we're really interested in epistemology is coming up with the theories in the first place, the solutions to problems, the creation of knowledge. And Bayesian reasoning doesn't even pretend to do that. It's supposed to be a way of weighting theories once we have them. And as I said, once we have one, then we've got one that solves the problem. It's not easy to come up with solutions to problems of how it is that physical reality operates. What is the successor to quantum theory? There are a number of physicists out there who say that they've got the way of unifying general relativity and quantum theory. But it's not like the Bayesian reasoners are able to do anything with respect to weighting any of these. Instead, what we're waiting for is ways to test these and rule them out, specifically for the theorists who are saying they've got these theories to themselves suggest the test, a way in which this thing could be tested. Because until they do that, they might be working outside of the realm of science, of physical science. Okay. So Bjorn has asked, so a policeman cannot treat a criminal badly if he does not want it? I don't know what that means. You might have to explain that one. But Bjorn goes on to say, the point of morality is that you should sometimes do what you want, is not what you should want, which is to counter the platinum rule. Coercion must mean more than someone violating your subjective preferences. People who coerce might need to be themselves coerced. There's no lack of logic in that, okay? The rule is, when it comes to coercion, don't coerce. Avoid coercion. Now, in the limit, sometimes that can be hard. You coerce yourself, we're error prone, and so we can just engage in behaviors that we don't even realize that we could be coercing ourselves and the people around us. So that's a thing. But when it comes to criminals, they're actively out there using force and violence. So the only moral response to that is to stop them, and that requires force. And force is a kind of coercion. So yeah, absolutely. It's not immoral, of course, to defense is not attack. These two things are not symmetrical. If someone attacks you violently, okay, then you can call that attack coercion. But thinking that all kinds of coercion stand on equal footing is wrong. Is wrong. Because the person who initiates violence, this is the non-aggression policy, or whatever you want to call it, okay, that the truly wrong thing is the person who first becomes violent. The person who initiates the violence, who initiates the aggression, they're in the wrong. They're in the wrong. And so at the moment where they make that choice, that decision to punch you in the face, then you have every right to do what it takes to stop them from doing what they're doing. And that includes, by the way, getting restitution. So they punch you in the face and try and run off. No, you're allowed to go and tackle them and bring them before a court. Why? Why are you allowed to do that? Because our traditions are wiser than us in many, many cases, and have figured out that if we want the society to function in the way that we want, then we have to do these things so that we can show our disapproval of certain kinds of behaviors. And if people are allowed to go punching people in the face without consequence, without then being coerced themselves, chaos follows. Okay, you might very well decide not to chase the person because that could be the smart thing to do in the given situation. But generally speaking, when coercion or violence happens, there needs to be consequences to stop the coercion. So that's what we're saying there. Alex has asked, when you're doing research, do you focus on a few problems at a time, or do you keep many problems open and search for ideas in an explanatory fashion? Well, insofar as I don't know if what I do is research in the way that a scientist might think of it, for example. I kind of did that as part of research projects at university, but nothing ever really serious. Part of my master's degree, I did research into galaxy collisions. So sometimes you'll hear me reference galaxy collisions. It's the thing that I kind of half know about. Not an expert in the sense that a real astrophysicist would be, but I know something about it. And so I know about that kind of research. So I've done that sort of thing. It was fun, but not super fun. Now, if I'm reading and exploring ideas, and if you want to call that research, what I'm doing is, I'm absolutely looking at a spectrum of problems from a number of different sources, looking at the way in which, for example, Feynman might have put things and how that might be improved. Popper might have put things and how that might be improved. The way David Deutsch has expressed things and where he's pointing us to, or what these best ideas, what consequences they might have. So do I focus on a few problems at a time? Yes, I'm in the luxurious position, I guess, being fortunate enough to be able to work on a number of things simultaneously. And that is very helpful, I think, to the creative process, because one thing can naturally lead into another thing. That things completely disconnected from my podcast stuff can be impacted by my podcast stuff, and vice versa. I'm able to explore a whole range of different things. So I think that answers the question. Bjorn, why should I treat a person with coercive preferences the way he wants to be treated? I'm still not sure what that means. So does it mean a person wants to be coerced, and so should I coerce them? Well, that's almost like a logical paradox. How can you coerce someone if that's what they want? If what they want is to be treated in a particular way, how is that coercion? They might say it. By the way, just on this kind of point, it's an edge case. A person might have a kind of 0.00001% of the population might have a quirky mental state where they take pleasure in being told what to do every single moment of the day, let's say. But then, you might very well argue they're not actually being coerced if you do that. Who'd want to do that, though? I don't know. I guess what I would say, if you're in a situation where a person has coercive preferences, this is a bizarre person. Why are you in a relationship with that person? The issue is with you. Why are you in this situation? Get out of that situation. This person's weird. You don't have to do anything for anyone, by the way. You don't have to. That is perhaps an equally fundamental rule of human interactions. You do you. Someone wants to be treated a certain way. You don't have to treat them at all. The platinum rule is just saying that if you are in an interaction with someone, you've voluntarily, willingly gone into this interaction with someone, and you need a guide for how to treat the person, here's the thing. You see people at shopping centres, okay? I used to work in retail in security. My goodness, customers can be awful. There are people out there who treat people who work in retail in shops or people who work in restaurants terribly. Customers can be terrible. What is a heuristic for a person who is learning about a culture, a teenager growing up? What is a heuristic they can use to figure out how to interact with a person selling stuff who's standing behind the cash register? The golden rule might be okay. Treat them the way you'd want to be treated in that situation. If you know the person, okay, it's a step further. Treat them how they want to be treated in that situation. Some people have the idea that, if they're the customer or something, that somehow or other, that somehow or other they're paying for a service and therefore what they've got before them is a servant, which is just an awful way to be. And I saw so much of this. You still see so much of it. Rudeness that goes on in retail. This is why I've said jokingly before, tongue in cheek, forget national service. Politicians sometimes on the conservative side of politics often say, we should get the teenagers into national service. They should all be made to go through the army. You want to treat people, you want to teach people about other people. You want to teach people and give them a hazing and understanding of human nature. Put them through retail for a few years. A lot of kids do come out of school and they get a part-time job somewhere. I tell you what, that's a steep learning curve. Treat people. In the first case, treat them how you would want to be treated. Presumably, you want to be treated well. And better than that, platinum rule: treat them how they want to be treated. It's just a heuristic. That's a heuristic. Where am I up to? Jitin. Hi, Jitin. Jitin's a great supporter of the podcast. Jitin, so if we only have one good theory, then what do we do about crucial experiments? Wait until another theory comes up. Yeah, well, there's no such thing as a crucial experiment in a situation where you do have only one theory. A crucial experiment, the definition of a crucial experiment is that test which decides between two good explanations. It's crucial. It's the thing you've got to do to rule out one theory. And in fact, rule out every other theory that you've thought of, except for the one that you've got. And of course, as I already said and emphasized, these situations that have arisen only have usually two. One theory will make prediction X, one theory will make prediction Y. You go out into the world, you do the experiment, you observe, you see observation Y, not X, it refutes the other one. So Jitin says, what do we do about crucial experiments? You don't need to worry about them. Okay, so what's the purpose of experimentation then? Perhaps to find problems with your theory. Okay, so that's the only other. It's not a crucial test. I was speaking in the live stream earlier today about the James West. It's the second time I've said James West. It's James Webb Space Telescope, the space telescope that's out there in space. It's the successor to the Hubble, and not until next month it's going to release new pictures of deep, deep space, the deepest images of the universe hitherto generated by a telescope. We haven't seen them yet. They're coming. So this observation, this telescope, constitutes an experiment, but it's not a crucial test. After all, what theories are we testing? We're kind of testing our existing theory of the cosmos. All of them, of the Big Bang, stellar evolution, the distribution of galaxies. Call it what you like. This telescope will provide interesting images no matter what. If it provides what is expected, what's expected is more and more and more galaxies. This is what has happened with, for example, the Hubble Deep Field and the Hubble Ultra Deep Field, the Hubble telescope taking pictures of dark places in space, revealing more and more galaxies. Presumably the James Webb Space Telescope is going to see more of the same. it still constitutes an experiment, but it's just kind of providing us more and more data consistent with our current explanations. But there is the chance it will provide the observation that makes our present theories problematic. Who knows? Maybe it will see distant galaxies, not redshifted, but blue shifted, coming towards us. I highly doubt this. There is no good explanation that we have that suggests that should happen. But let's say it did happen. What then? Aha. Then we're in a situation where we've got a problem. We've got a problem. Our theories are not refuted yet because we have no other theory to jump to. But what we have is a problem, an observational problem. A few things could happen. One is someone comes up with a new explanation, a new creative explanation that accounts for absolutely everything that we've observed in the universe hitherto, and also for the blue shifted distant galaxies. Problem solved. Okay, that's the hard road to take because it requires a new theory to be created. And, you know, this is hard stuff. This is why you know, Einstein is famous because he was one of the rare people able to do this. Why Newton was famous, you know, able to come up with systems of the world. Now, the other alternative is the telescopes made a mistake. How? Well, there's all sorts of imaging processing that goes on. There's all sorts of electronics in these telescopes these days. Who knows what mistake it could make somewhere along the way. And so the observation itself could be in error in some way. And so if we do see these blue shifted galaxies, the galaxies coming towards us, rushing towards us that are, you know, billions of light years away, but they're coming towards us when they should be moving away because the universe is expanding, it might just turn out that that's not really what we're seeing. That what we're in fact seeing is some artifact from the telescope. And this has happened in the history of astronomy before as well, that we thought we were seeing something through the telescope, and in fact, systematic error, as we call it. Yeah, so that's happened in the history of astronomy and the history of science. Bjorn, Popper has said that in order to have a tolerant society, we need to sometimes be intolerant towards intolerance. Is one allowed then to punch ideas? Is it acceptable to punch Nazis? Well, punching ideas, well, of course, what we want, I think there's a way to refine what Popper is saying to explain a little bit more. He's correct that we shouldn't tolerate the intolerant, but we need to tease out different kinds of intolerance. After all, you know, just to be silly, someone might be lactose intolerant. But I'm kind of being serious there because people can be intolerant of all sorts of things. I can be intolerant of certain kinds of music. Should I be tolerated in society? Absolutely. So what does intolerance mean? Well, intolerance is a label for when you're not tolerating other people or the existence of other people. Then we have a problem. What I would say to refine this is what we want is a situation where we are not destroying the means of error correction, which is a broader and deeper claim than Popper's claim about tolerance. A person is a means of error correction. We don't want to destroy any means of error correction. So therefore, we don't want to destroy people. We don't want to imprison people, hamper people, be violent towards people, because that's destroying a means of error correction. Destroying a person is destroying a means of error correction. And destroying a person could be murdering a person, but it could also mean just destroying them as a person by mistreating them, imprisoning them, being racist, being prejudiced, all that sort of stuff is destroying the means of error correction. But also, this idea, this paradox of tolerance, it's also about speech. And so do not destroy the means of error correction means allow free speech, maximal free speech. And you know, I differ with some people on this. I think that everyone's responsible for their own behavior. We don't need to go into that, I suppose. But so we sometimes need to be intolerant towards intolerance. Yes, we do. Is it allowed to punch ideas? We need to counter ideas, criticize ideas. Is it acceptable to punch Nazis? In our society, in Western civilization, this is what legal systems exist for. This is why we have a legal system. that a person can stand up and claim to be a Nazi, and we can be intolerant towards their ideas. Now, until such time as they become violent or are in the immediate position of calling for violence, then no, you can't punch Nazis. No, you can't. You can't punch anyone. This is why we have traditions and institutions. You don't punch people. You call the police. Unless, of course, you've just been punched by someone, then you can punch them back. And the legal system allows for this, okay? You're allowed self-defense. You're allowed to, well, in Australia, I know the Australian law, maybe things differ around the world, but in Australia, you may use that amount of force required to prevent the violence from continuing. Okay. These are rare situations, by the way. Thank you to Bjorn for your donation. Thank you very much. Adil. Brett, could you please explain what justified true belief is and why it is wrong? For example, does postmodernism, even though it styles itself as avant-garde, still buy into the wrong concept? Great. Well, this is my hobby horse. So justified true belief is the definition or conception of knowledge gifted to us by Plato, among others, and has sailed on through the intellectual traditions of the West and the Enlightenment through to today, where it is taken for granted essentially as the definition of knowledge, or insofar as it's not the definition of knowledge, minor corrections to this definition are sometimes regarded as being knowledge. So knowledge, in order to be knowledge on this account, needs to be justified as true. You need to have a reason for thinking something is true. So on this account, you look out your window and you see cows, and because you have observed cows, you're justified in thinking this is true. You know there are cows out there because you've observed them. So this apparently is a justification that you're truly seeing cows. And so therefore you should believe this thing. If you believe it, it's knowledge. But knowledge should never be like this. Knowledge doesn't need to be believed to be known. There's all sorts of ways in which we could be wrong. We look out the window, we see this thing that looks like a cow. Are we justified in thinking it's truly a cow? Yeah, in this day and age, maybe it's a very, very good hologram of a cow. We could be mistaken. We could be mistaken. We might not be justified at all. What could the possible justification be? These photons of light entering our eye? Knowledge is, as I say, information that solves a problem. Now, belief is this thing where it has a number of different definitions itself, some of which contradict, some of which stand in stark contrast to one another. On the one hand, it could mean think is absolutely true. I believe in God. When people say I believe in God, they're not saying I hope or guess that he's there. They are genuinely saying something more. It's a strong claim. Really, truly, God exists. I believe it. But on the other hand, you could say, where's John at the moment? I believe he's in the living room. Well, then you're sort of saying, not that you truly, honestly think that he is, but your best guess is, which gets more to what knowledge is about, right? Knowledge is more about best guesses, conjecturing good explanations. So what justified true belief is the old conception of knowledge that people now debate about because they want to figure out what the correct justifications are. What can justify something as true? In mathematics, you start off with the axioms and then you can justify as true Pythagoras' theorem. Is Pythagoras' theorem justified as true? Well, if the axioms are true, then it's justified as true. Should you believe it on this account? Yes, you should, because you've justified it as true, and then you believe it. But how do you know the axioms are true? They're not justified, except if you say, well, Something that's self-evidently true is justified. Well, how do you know it's self-evident? Okay, and in my podcast I did with Naval, I go on about that. There's no settled mathematics thing, and through any 2 points you can draw a unique straight line, all that sort of stuff. So there are all sorts of things in mathematics that are thought to be self-evidently true that turn out not to be. We can always be in error. This search for justifications is always going to produce, or always going to contain, possible sources of error. So therefore we can't be justified, or probably justified. We don't need to be. We just need to solve our problems and explain stuff. And so knowledge is information that solves a problem. It is useful, therefore, useful information, but we don't need to believe any of it. Newtonian gravity didn't need to be believed. That's my best example of this stuff. We can use Newtonian mechanics and Newtonian gravity to solve problems today. It counts as knowledge. It counts as knowledge. But you're not justified in thinking it true, because it's not true. It's been refuted, but it'll solve a problem. It'll solve a problem of how to get rockets to the moon, how to predict the tides, how to keep bridges up. All of this can come down to Newtonian mechanics. But no one should believe it, even though it's knowledge, and it is knowledge. Yeah, so justified true belief, all wrong. Postmodernism, concludes rightly that it's a fool's errand to try and justify anything as true. You can't do it. But then wrongly concludes on that basis that because you can't justify things as true, that therefore knowledge isn't possible. So they get that wrong. Popper walked the line properly between dogmatism, where people say, I can justify something as true. I have got the final theory. God's written it down. It's there in nature. I can prove it mathematically. I'm justified thinking this is true. Therefore, I believe it, and I'll fight to the death anyone who says otherwise. That's the dogmatist who endorses the justified true belief view of knowledge. And the postmodernist who says, well, no, what you think is a justified reason for thinking something is true isn't a justification at all. You can't know that thing is true. You can never know something is absolutely true. Therefore, knowledge isn't possible. And so you go down that road of postmodernism and relativism. Popper came along and said, you're both making a mistake. You're both endorsing this idea of justified truth. You don't need to justify things as true. You don't need to believe this stuff. What knowledge is, you can know something and simultaneously know it to be false. But it's going to solve particular problems. And because you can't justify anything as true, but you can improve it, you can make progress, and that goes on infinitely. That's an unbounded process. So much more optimistic, because the dogmatist says, I've already got the final truth. There's no point trying to improve on this. Here we go. We've got it. We've got the final truth. No progress possible after that. The relativist, the postmodernist, says it's not possible to get justified truth anywhere. Therefore, knowledge isn't possible. Therefore, no genuine progress is possible. People talk like this in academia quite often. It's not real progress. So they both agree that progress isn't possible. Only if you take on a view of conjectural knowledge genuinely can you really endorse the perspective that progress is always possible, because you don't have the final truth. But progress is possible. Objective knowledge is possible. There's something to be wrong about out there in reality. When you make a claim, it could be wrong because there's a reality to the situation. There is something true, and you can be wrong about it. You can make mistakes objectively. And by correcting those mistakes, you make progress. Okay. Let's see. Could you say something about why Popper seems to say... I'll go through the next few quickly. We'll just do a quick rapid fire, because then I need to go to dinner. Here in Australia, it is 7:19 p.m. I thought I'd do this second one because it'll give the Aussies perhaps a chance to come to come onto the website, because they will have finished work for the day. So I don't know what time is best for me to do these live streams if I continue to do them when people are up around the world. Being in Australia, it's either, middle of the day for me here is middle of the night for people in Europe. Okay, anyway, so I'm going to do a rapid fire bunch, maybe hang around for another 10 minutes. So let's go. Let's see what we can get through. Could you say something about why Popper seems to say that problem finding might be more important than solutions? Does he? I don't know. I hasten to add, I'm not a Popper scholar. People sometimes think of me as being some expert on Popper. I'm really not. I'm a fan of Popper, and I've read as much of his stuff as I can get a hold of, but I'm not someone who is studying carefully what he says. Now, I would agree with that statement, absolutely, that problem finding might be more important than solutions, because there could be a whole bunch of problems for which the solution is unimportant. So you don't need to find those solutions. They're not urgent. But absolutely finding the problems is really, really important, because, and this is why I say rapid progress is our most pressing problem. Forget all the other problems out there that people name all the time. Okay, let people work on those. I'm not saying forget. Okay, forget is the wrong word, but forget becoming pessimistic and downcast and falling into concerns that the world is going to end because of any one of these named problems that the intellectuals and the academics have come up with. Instead, be concerned about the rate of progress, because it's the rate of progress that will allow us to identify new problems. That is why problem finding is more important than any given solution. Generally speaking, there could be the disaster for which the solution is needed more urgently than new problem finding. For example, if the asteroid really does appear in the sky tomorrow, and NASA and the European Space Agency and all the experts converge on predicting, on saying, this thing is going to hit within 6 months, it's absolutely going to hit the Earth, then in that case, all bets are off. We need to focus on that solution. That thing's absolutely going to wipe us out. We've got to do something about it. Let's find the solution. It's urgent. But generally speaking, when we're not in that position where civilization is going to be wiped out, or you personally aren't going to die from the growing tumor that the doctors just informed you about, in all other situations, then you need to be out there problem finding, both as a civilization and individually, because there is some problem out there, more than one problem, there's many problems, infinite problems possible that could wipe us out. And so we need to keep on searching for them so that we can find the solution to them in time. But yeah, so that's why I would say finding new problems, okay, which often comes from solving old problems, by the way, that's another way of finding problems, is kind of the more important thing. But that just means that fundamental research is the most important thing, civilizationally speaking, fundamental research. And the most fundamental of all the sciences is physics, and the most fundamental parts of physics are the people who work on the foundations of physics. And so those foundational areas of physics touch more areas of our intellectual understanding of the universe than anything else. Okay, I better keep on going. A question from Luli's website I'd like your view on. Why is interestingness a better criterion for action than importance? Well, I guess there's the importance is not an objective criteria. People might say that it is, but interestingness is just what you find fun. So I don't really know. Like I can certainly imagine a situation, where your health is in danger and you have an important problem, but you're not interested in which case the important problem of having, again, the tumor removed, I guess it would be, how could you not be interested in that? It has to be interesting in that. But in the situation where you're perfectly healthy, where life is going well and whatever else, then yeah, you want to pursue your interests. I'd need to be given a specific example in order to be able to answer this question in anything more than universal broad brush strokes. There might not be a universal answer to this unless we can better understand the distinction between interestingness and importance. And I'm sure Luli has that distinction in mind, which I don't right now. Upvote comment. Are you aware of Nassim Taleb's books? Absolutely, yes. I've read, The Black Swan. What are your thoughts about them? Good. I think that he's certainly Popperian in some senses, but also I think that he takes probability too seriously as a universal explanation. That if you get into this business, sometimes you can get into the issue of forecasting, prophesying. So that can be a hazard of sometimes this approach. His books are, well, his book that I've read is good, but I don't follow his work in depth. But I am, if the question is, am I just aware of them? Yes, I am. What are your thoughts about them? Good as far as I can tell, a bit heavy on placing deep importance on probability and knowledge of probability. My views on probability are on my YouTube channel, Probability and Risk. I tend to side with David Deutsch on this, that it's largely a scam because what happens is determined to happen by the laws of physics. Things don't probably happen, they happen. And if you want to guess about the future, either you've got a good explanation, in which case it's a logical derivation from the scientific theory you have, or you don't know because knowledge creation is going to have an impact. Human choice is going to have an impact. And in those cases, no one has a clue. Sometimes you might want to prepare for the future, but that's a whole other issue. And we could talk about that some other time. How to become better at finding criticism of one's own ideas. I don't think there's any special recipe to this, other than if you're in the position of asking the question, you've already made 95% of the headway, I would say. You're already in the position of thinking, where could I possibly be wrong? Can I possibly be wrong? And yeah, like when things become a problem, that's when you want to start criticizing. When you're stuck, when you're not having fun, when things aren't interesting, when things are going wrong, it's then you need to criticize yourself. If everything's going right and you're just having fun and you're creating wealth and knowledge and your relationships are all great, then why do you want to criticize your ideas? Apparently, they're solving all of your problems at a rapid rate and you're just getting better day after day after day. So there could be a very good reason why not to go around criticizing. You might think, well, I can make even still faster progress and have even more fun than what I'm having, maybe. But there's something to be said for also enjoying the present moment, of being at peace with the fact that you've got a great life. If you do. Now, if you don't, then of course you've got to start criticizing your ideas. So it's that when we're talking about, I'm not a self-help type person, but that is what I would say the distinction is. So if you are in a situation where life is not going well, how do you become better at criticizing one's own ideas? It could very well take more than just you. And many people have made this point before. If you are in a bad situation, you think things are going badly, first place to go is friends and family. Absent that, then the professional, the psychologist, all of whom can help you criticize your ideas. Other people can see the problems that you might not be able to see in yourself. Sometimes you just don't know how to criticize your own ideas. That doesn't help, of course, in answering the question, how can you become better at criticizing your own ideas? Beyond what I've just said, I don't know. Talking to other people, because you can be blind to the ideas that need to be criticized. Let's keep going. Bjorn Deutsch has said that there are anti-rational memes. Sometimes such ideas are exchanged in free markets. Is the government allowed to intervene and stop such ideas through technical means? There are anti-rational memes. Such ideas are exchanged in free markets. An anti-rational meme is something that actively causes the holder to stop criticism in some way, shape, or form. I'd need to have a specific example. The free market is just a way in which people can cooperate and exchange stuff, money, services, goods, without coercion. Should the government be allowed to intervene and stop such ideas through technical means? I say no, but again, we would need specifics. Should there be a free market in plutonium? Perhaps not. That's another issue. From Aaron, thank you for your contribution. I'm learning so much from your podcast that I'm happy to show my appreciation. Thank you very much, Aaron. Thank you kindly. Alex, Joseph Agassi has said in his book, on Popper mentioned the latter believed in a moral duty to work hard. Do you agree we have such a duty? Why? It depends upon what work hard means. I've thought about this a lot recently because I know some people have the philosophy of not working hard. And yet my observation of them is they work hard. I'm in sometimes this interesting position where I very much endorse the ideas of the non-coercion community. And at the same time, simultaneously, I see great value and insight in the work of someone like Jocko Willink, this ex-Navy SEAL guy who talks about discipline as freedom. And, he's this uber masculine, tough guy who gets up at, 4:30 every morning and does a workout and seems to be self-coercing, but I don't think so. I think in both cases, the non-coercion people and someone like that are having fun. Jocko's way of life is not a prescription for happiness for everyone, but for that kind of person, it's fun. He would probably look at the non-coercion people and think, that looks like hell to me. Not having to get up at 4:30 every morning. He loves it, So he works hard, and it's obvious to everyone that he works hard. And there's a lot of people out there online that, seem to be sort of, what do we say, role models for people on how to work hard, get the better body, earn more money, become more healthy, work hard. It can be coercive, absolutely. Working hard can be coercive. In other words, engaging in activities that you don't really want to, that make life not fun, tasks that your boss wants you to do and you don't really want to do. That's all a problem. But when you're personally in control of your life entirely, as someone like Jocko is, he doesn't have to get up at 4:30 in the morning, but he does. Is he self-coercing? I just don't think so. I listen to his podcast all the time, and he's having a ball of a time. Now, he tells other people, this is what you should do, because if you do the kind of things he does, then it will help. Now, that's a good prescription for someone, and Jordan Peterson does a sort of similar kind of a thing, where, especially with young men, not knowing what they want to do with their lives, being unhappy with their life, just being a rudderless boat, one of my friends used to say, not knowing in what direction they should go, especially as they move through their teens into their early 20s. It's a big issue for some people. In that situation where you just don't know, then whether you go down the road of so-called non-coercion and just purely having fun all the time, or you go down the Jocko road, both might help, but the Jocko road could be the one where you go, oh, now I'm enjoying things. Hey, I'm going to the gym and I'm, getting more fit and strong. Hey, I'm reading more books and I'm finding this really intellectually stimulating. Hey, I'm going out and meeting more people, You're kind of, in a sense, you might call it forcing or coercing yourself into these situations that you otherwise wouldn't, because this older, wiser person has said, I've been there before and I know what it's like, and do this. And then you quickly find that it's like climbing a little hill. So maybe you've got to coerce yourself to get to the top of the hill. But once you're at the top of the hill, then you're rolling straight on down and you're having a lot of fun, almost like the roller coaster, I suppose. It's hard, that bit, and then you sort of go rushing down. And I think that this is what the Jocko Willink style people of the world are all about. So moral duty to work hard, I think moral duty to find what's fun and then pursue that as far as possible. And if that's working hard, then I'm with Popper. It'd just be interesting to ask Popper what he really meant. I think what he means is, to solve problems. And Popper was working at, of course, at a particular time, a particularly difficult time. for him, and so he understood. He came from a culture and from historical circumstances that meant, in order to escape from the problems that he had, then the style of working hard was different then to what it is now. And so the prescription for how to live a life of flourishing may very well have been different then to what it is now. We can reinterpret what working hard is, I would say. Okay. Continue with the live streams. Quickfire question. Is Deutsch's prediction about AGIs wrong with how Lambda currently seems to develop? Aaron, if I could just point you to my last live stream, it's there on my video channel. I talked about Lambda, so I won't go into the full explanation again now. I would just say that the questions asked of it could point to consciousness, but I think that's a very bad explanation. It's a very bad explanation. This thing is actually experiencing consciousness and suffering and is a creative AGI. Bad explanation. Better explanation. It's an advanced chatbot that has been loaded with a whole bunch of terms, phrases, sentences, stock responses centered around talking about personhood. So, I want to get it on to talking about some other topics, a range of other topics. Then let's see how it does. Let's see how it does when it gets off topic. So yeah, that's what I would say about that. Previous podcast kind of thing. Bjorn again. Thank you, Bjorn, for your comments. Sean, hi, Sean. Sean Knight. Good Aussie friend. How do we distinguish between the is and the ought? It seems to me that there is a liminality, a top-down version of our participation in reality that isn't nested in a rational material landscape. So if we take on board the reality that is taught to us by physics, I would say that that all possible ises are instantiated somewhere in this physical reality. And our purpose as human beings is to determine which of these physical realities we wish to occupy in greatest measure. There's a lot of loaded jargon there. So is in one way is what exists now and what the methodologies of science tell us is the case. What is really going on, what our best explanations of science account for. That's our is. Ought is the domain of morality. What could be the case, but isn't yet. So we distinguish between these two cases as ought is the is that we want to make actual, but is at the moment only potential. And how we actualize it is by making choices and creating knowledge. It's the distinction between not merely what is possible, but rather what has already happened in our timeline. That's the is. And the ought is what is yet to happen in our timeline, but we want. And so we can't derive an ought from an is. Okay, Hume is right about that. But we can't, as David Deutsch points out, we can't derive ises from ises either. Just because it is the case that light is coming from the sky and we call that a star, doesn't mean it is the case that, for example, stars are small, dim, and cold, which appears to be what they are in the sky at night. So the is of what we see does not give us the is of what they really are. So we can't derive is from is. So forget about ought from is. We can't divide is from is. Yeah. So, so I think that's that. Will you publish this on your short podcast channel? They should appear in my YouTube feed. Now, whether or not I should put them onto audio, I don't know. I've got, the Apple podcast and all that sort of stuff. Whether or not this is worth turning into a purely audio thing, I don't know. People tell me they can listen via YouTube. So, yeah, I'm not sure. Bjorn has entered the discussion with Sean. That's good. About Hegel and stuff. As Brett said, the final ought to always be to abide by. Error correction, yeah. So good. Fantastic. Thanks, everyone. It's been a lot of fun. So I will, again, probably do this like next week or something like that. But this has been great. Thank you very much to the people who sent through some support, super chat questions. That's a lot of fun as well. Until next time, which should be next week sometime, I presume. Yeah, have fun. Enjoy yourselves and goodbye.